burst out crying, and I immediately did the same. If I could switch places with Derrick, I'd do it without a second thought. What messes me up most of all is that he was by himself. I'm the one that caused Derrick to die alone. He never lived a full life because of me. When I killed Derrick, I didn't have morals because I didn't know what they were. What's different between me now and when I was 13? I value life.
His 2012 parole hearing did not bode any better than his prior 5 attempts. They acknowledged that Eric hadn't been disciplined for any violent offenses while locked up and that he was making progress toward institutional goals and through programs. In his statements at his 6th parole board hearing, he said that if he was released, he would likely try to go to a halfway house or a shelter away from Savona, where he committed his crime. He said that he realized that if he had been released earlier, he would not have been ready because he wasn't emotionally connected yet. So, having been denied parole 5 previous times, I'm not opposed to that because I realized that I wasn't ready. He didn't have any new insight into his motivation to murder Derrick, just stating his desire to hurt someone else because he was an abused and bullied child. He then said he feels remorse and now comprehends the value of human life. But they cited community opposition in their rejection this time, and their statement was very similar to the one they made the previous time. They continued to find his release at odds with the good of society. In 2014, Eric went up for parole for the 7th time and had a bit more to say this time. Quote, I took my anger and frustration and rage out on him. I took it out on Derrick, and he did not deserve that. Who I was at age 13 does not exist. That child who committed that crime, he's gone. He's never coming back. He listed his stepfather, his older sister, and local high school students as his main tormentors and called his acts horrendous, uncalled for, and wrong. The 8th rejection in 2016 was standard. However, earlier this month, he was denied parole for the 9th time.
And new tonight, a man convicted in a notorious slaying of a 4-year-old child from 25 years ago in the Southern Tier will remain in prison. The New York State Parole Board once again last week turning down parole for Eric M. Smith. Smith, who is now 38 years old, was 13 years old back in August 1993 when police determined that he lured 4-year-old Derrick Ro into a wooded area near his home in Savona, Steuben County, and then strangled and bludgeoned the child. According to the Rochester Democrat and Chronicle, Smith claimed he repressed anger because of bullying, but a parole board member said he released it on little Derrick. Smith now being held at the Collins Correctional Facility on a life sentence. He'll be eligible for parole again in January of 2020.
For the very first time, it was not by unanimous decision. One commissioner on the parole board decided that Eric, now 38 years old, is a mature adult who takes responsibility for his actions. He feels that further institutionalization serves little purpose, considering that Eric has now been locked up for almost 25 years. Regardless, the board collectively ruled that his release would continue to undermine the law. They continue to harbor grave concern over the fact that he took his anger out on Derrick unprovoked. They recognize his accomplishments while behind bars, such as positive programming, volunteering with the chaplain, and apologizing repeatedly, but feel none of it outweighs the severity and brutality of the crime he committed in 1993 at the age of 13. The village of Savona, New York, was wholly traumatized by this event, calling it 2 murders realistically. The murder of Derrick, of course, at the forefront, but the murder of Eric's normal life and the slaughter of their town's innocents also had their effects. The families of Derrick's father and Eric's mother were long-standing residents of the area. Everyone had had contact with someone from either or both families at some point. This really complicated the collective feelings of the tiny community of less than 1,000 and compounded their grief. They've never let go of this case. The town is small, so it isn't hard to find yourself passing several of the locations key to the case as you maneuver about your day. They've never forgotten Derrick or how he had mastered the 2-wheeler and learned to cast his own fishing line at the young age of 4. or how he had read to his baby brother bedtime stories every night, but didn't live to start kindergarten. By the conclusion of the trial, most in the area were done speaking to the media. Many were tired of having every nuance of their small-town existence henpecked to find a reason or a place for blame. By the time of his trial in late summer of 1994, O.J. and Eric were neck and neck in terms of news coverage time around Savona. The neighbor behind whose home Derrick was murdered was particularly introspective of the circumstances. On that particular day, he and his wife were inside when normally they would have been enjoying their morning out in the backyard. They think about it every day, every time they go out back, actually. What if they'd been there? Throughout the early 2000s, the Robys began working closely with former Assemblywoman Senator Catherine Young to increase the amount of time that must pass before parole can be sought. First came Penny's Law, which was passed in 2003 and was named after Penny Brown, a mother and beloved midwife who was murdered by a 15-year-old boy while out jogging. We will be covering her case and examining the actions of her killer, Edward Kint, in a future episode. Penny's Law enabled judges to impose harsher sentences when a juvenile is tried as an adult. Eric faced a minimum of 5 and a maximum of 9 years to life, meaning he had to serve 9 years before applying to the parole board. Penny's Law made the minimum 15 and the maximum 25 years much more appropriate for such convictions. The Robys currently support and lobby for passage of Lorraine's Law, currently an Assembly committee in the state of New York. Lorraine Miranda was tragically murdered by her fiancé, and her family, like the Robys, endured parole hearings every 2 years. Chris Patterson, 49, is currently serving 15 years to life and was most recently rejected by the parole board last year. This year will mark 30 years since her murder. This bill will increase the amount of time between parole eligibility hearings from every 2 years to every 5 years. Although passage won't affect the Robys or Eric Smith, it will give other victims' families drastically more time between preparation of parole hearings and having to relive those tragic events. Eric Smith will be up for parole for the 10th time in January 2020, the year he turns 40. Derrick D.J. Roby would be 30 years old this October. CrimeCon 2018 is forthcoming this weekend in Nashville. Follow us at Killer Kids Pod wherever you get your social media for pictures and updates from the convention. With the recent apprehension of the Golden State Killer still fresh on our minds, I think the weekend just got a bit more intriguing. Thanks to the State of Logic podcast for your continued faith and sponsorship. And as always, this episode was produced by Resonate Recordings. Visit them today at resonaterecordings.com and get an introductory podcast episode produced for free. This is War Baby. Thanks for listening, and check back soon for another true tale of the terror kids can cause on Murderous Minors, Killer Kids. Don't be scared.